Breaking news this Wednesday night, a private jet plummets from the sky in Russia. Among those presumed dead is the mercenary leader who staged a brief mutiny against the Kremlin. A controversial deal under more scrutiny, the RCMP's potential criminal investigation into Ontario Premier Doug Ford's Greenbelt land swap. Wildfire evacuees hoping for government compensation.
It definitely hasn't been a cheap trip.
The help that could be on the way.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. There is mystery tonight surrounding a private plane that fell from the sky northwest of Moscow. Russian authorities say the founder of a mercenary group who led a short-lived mutiny against the Kremlin was on the passenger list. This is the jet as it plummets to the ground. There are reports eyewitnesses saw a rocket launch and heard two loud explosions before the plane fell. There's been no independent confirmation that Yevgeny Prigozhin was on that plane. 2 months ago, Prigozhin and his Wagner group directly challenged the authority of Russian President Vladimir Putin, who called them traitors. And it's widely believed Prigozhin's days were numbered. Crystal Gamansing has our top story tonight.
Flaming wreckage from a plane said to be registered to the head of the mercenary military group Wagner. The name Yevgeny Prigozhin became known around the world as his militia battled Ukrainians alongside invading Russian forces. But it was his audacious march of justice 2 months ago to the day that had people questioning his future. The once close ally of the Russian president publicly criticized the military leadership, claiming his men were not being given needed supplies. Prigozhin led his team on a mutiny to Moscow, but they didn't reach the capital. A deal was struck between him and Vladimir Putin. Jeff Shadeo is with the Institute of European Russian Eurasian Studies.
Putin obviously has a track record of his opponents being poisoned, being shot, falling out windows. This is a much more dramatic killing, but one that fits directly with his mode of operation.
Prigozhin's plane was traveling from Moscow to St. Petersburg. It dropped off the radar suddenly Wednesday evening. Russia's Civilian Aviation Authority confirmed Prigozhin's name was on the passenger list. It included 7 people and 3 crew members. Russian media reports all those on board were killed.
There's not much that happens when Russia is not behind. I don't know enough to know the answer.
And there's a bunch of dominoes that will fall in the next really 24 hours and then beyond then. First of all, it'll be interesting to see what the remaining leadership of Wagner says.
If Wagner forces do blame the Kremlin, will their soldiers stop fighting in Ukraine? And who will be installed as the new leader? There are so many questions that remain unanswered, not only in Europe, but in Africa as well. Wagner is heavily involved in a number of countries on that continent, and those operations are said to be incredibly lucrative for the Kremlin. Donna?
Crystal Gamansing in London, thanks. The RCMP is now exploring whether an investigation is warranted into a land deal made by Ontario Premier Doug Ford. The province's Auditor General has already found the deal was heavily influenced by a small group of well-connected developers who stand to make billions. The land is part of a protected greenbelt at the heart of the Greater Golden Horseshoe near Toronto. It's 810,000 hectares. It was created in 2005 to restrict urban sprawl and protect farmland, wetlands, and lakes. Under the controversial deal, nearly 3,000 hectares of land has already been removed, benefiting developers. And at the heart of the issue is whether those developers got special treatment because of their close relationship with Premier Ford. Colin DeMello is with me from Queen's Park in Toronto. Colin, there have been several inquiries into this already before it was handed to the police. Give us a sense of what they concluded.
Well, the most significant information, Donna, comes from Ontario's Auditor General, who, after a 6-month investigation, concluded that developers were given preferential treatment by the Ford government when it came to the extraction of certain lands from Ontario's Greenbelt. The Auditor General determined that it was Premier Doug Ford who kicked off the process by telling his housing minister specifically to look at lands in the Greenbelt that could be opened up for development. It was the housing minister's chief of staff who did all of the work, this report found, meeting with developers, getting packages from developers, and specific instruction on which lands to target. That chief of staff has now resigned. There are questions, though, about exactly what Premier Doug Ford knew and exactly when. The Premier says he didn't communicate with any developers, but Global News has already reported in the past that the Premier held a private fundraiser at his own home about a year ago in August of 2022. At that fundraiser, there were developers there. Those developers, the Premier said, were close personal friends. And at that fundraiser, the Premier was raising money for his own daughter's wedding, meaning that money would have gone from those developers potentially into the Ford family pocket. That is what a lot of people here at Queen's Park in Toronto are saying points to some kind of evidence that Premier Doug Ford was personally involved.
Okay, and now that this is in the hands of the RCMP and they're looking at a potential investigation, what could the blowback be for Premier Ford?
The blowback, Donna, has already started. The opposition here say there need to be more resignations. Ontario's Integrity Commissioner has been engaged in a months-long investigation about whether the housing minister or any other member of the Ford government violated ethics rules here at Queen's Park, which means there will be much more to come, not to mention protests that the government is facing over exactly what they have done with the Greenbelt. The Premier, by the way, not backing down. He says the Greenbelt extractions will continue.
All right, Colin DeMello at Queen's Park in Toronto, thanks.
Thank you.
In BC, rain is helping in the fight against those wildfires. More than 20 millimeters fell overnight in some areas where fires are raging, and that has cleared the smoke for the first time in several days. More than 25,000 people are still out of their homes across BC. Some evacuation orders have been lifted, some travel restrictions loosened, but officials warn the danger has not passed. Neetu Garcha is in West Kelowna, where a travel ban is still in place. Neetu.
Yeah, Donna, the ban has been lifted in all other communities, but non-essential traffic is still being restricted to the city of West Kelowna for those staying in temporary accommodations. With the smoke having cleared for the first time since the inferno swept through this area on Thursday, the extent of the wildfire's destruction is being made clear. Officials here say the most challenging days are ahead as people and communities learn of what they describe as monumental loss. And they noted today there will be collective grief.
Filling up in Shannon Lake, nearly 20 helicopters are working in the West Kelowna area of BC's Okanagan Valley. Fire officials say they were helped by almost 22 millimeters of overnight rainfall.
Amazing how many homes are still standing.
Cleaner air means residents like Sandra and Arden Knoll are literally and figuratively breathing a bit better. With the smoke having cleared, they drove up to this area to see the mountainside they live on. They say it gives a clearer picture of the work firefighters did to save about 3,000 houses.
All these homes are still here. What they did is amazing.
The Knolls say they were traveling back from Saskatchewan when flames approached their neighborhood.
Unfortunately, we didn't get back to our house before we were evacuated, but our house is still there.
For now, they're living out of a camper, like this family in Kelowna.
Anxious to get home.
Kirsten Furby says her family lived out of a camper until they were assigned a hotel room on Tuesday after leaving home on Friday, capturing these images of how close the flames were.
They were like, be prepared to evacuate immediately.
Do you have any official confirmation about whether your home is still standing?
No, we don't yet.
We can see the hill behind our house and it's not burnt.
Regional officials say evacuees need an unprecedented level of support, and the emergency support services have had a difficult time keeping up.
We've had large shipments almost daily coming in from Vancouver.
As volunteers like this group are working to help fill the gaps with donated supplies for evacuees and this box of care packages being taken straight to the fire department.
Thank you very much. It's going to be very hard for us as a community to come out of this.
It's emotional, for sure. It's a traumatic event.
As families facing uncertainty about their homes find comfort in knowing no human lives have been lost in this fire and their loved ones are safe.
Officials say no homes were lost in the last 24 hours, but they have assessed a new total of 84 West Kelowna and West Bank First Nation properties damaged, with nearly 200 in the greater area. And with hundreds of people still out of their houses, they say there's still a lot more work to be done before more people can return home. Donna?
All right, Neetu, thanks. In the Northwest Territories, wildfires near Yellowknife, Hay River and Fort Smith are said to be at bay, but thousands of evacuees are not being allowed home and might not be able to return for weeks. As Jeff Semple reports, that's raising questions about support for those living hundreds of kilometers away from home.
30,000 residents of the Northwest Territories left last week in a hurry. The trip unexpected and expensive. Nice to see you guys.
Nice to see you too.
Laura Dignas and her husband made the 20-hour drive with their 3 young children, 2 dogs, and her stepmother.
It was pretty long. We ended up having to take 2 vehicles. Our baby threw up everywhere.
Their vehicles broke down twice and needed new tires. They've already spent almost $5,000.
It definitely hasn't been a cheap trip that we weren't expecting.
Evacuees who followed the order and made the long drive from Yellowknife into Alberta are spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars on lodging, fuel, and food, and are now left wondering whether those costs will be covered. The territorial government said this week those who left on evacuation flights will be flown back once it's safe. But evacuees who drove could be on the hook for their own travel costs. That news was not well received by evacuees like this couple.
You didn't request, you ordered.
Yeah.
Right? There's a big difference.
Yeah.
See you in court, right?
Can evacuees expect to receive any compensation for their travel costs?
You know, I want to say a cautious yes.
Today, the territorial government sought to clarify there will be financial supports to ensure everyone can get home. Reimbursements for other travel costs will be decided within days.
65% of the population is no longer in its territory. It's extreme. And that has a number of impacts. And we're going to put some more programs out reflective of that.
The Deputy Prime Minister hinted that federal help is also coming.
We're very happy to work with the government, with the leadership of the Northwest Territories on what might be some extraordinary expenses.
Most standard home insurance policies also cover forced evacuations. The Insurance Bureau of Canada says expenses from extreme weather have skyrocketed over the past 2 decades.
To make sure you review your insurance policy, know what coverage you have.
This summer offering a hard lesson on the growing costs of climate change. Jeff Semple, Global News, High Level, Alberta.
When a wildfire or another natural disaster hits, it's an emotional and financial roller coaster for everyone involved. The effects can have long-lasting implications. Experts say addressing mental health must be part of the response.
My hope that, between things like crisis lines or Care to Speak, that people are able to take advantage of getting emotional support after what are some really difficult professional and personal days right now.
If you or someone you know is experiencing a mental health crisis after being affected by wildfires, a toll-free number is available. You can call 1-866-585-0445. Ontario psychologist and author Jordan Peterson has lost a legal fight and must undergo social media training. An Ontario court upheld an order from the College of Psychologists of Ontario that Peterson take a coaching course on professionalism in public statements. The ruling followed several complaints about his online commentary, including polarizing remarks directed at Liberal politicians, a plus-size model, and transgender actor Elliot Page. The college determined Peterson's statements could amount to professional misconduct. If Peterson fails to comply, he could lose his license to practice. India is on the moon tonight. Coming up, the giant leap forward in its space program. That is one giant leap for India. It is now the first country to land a spacecraft on the moon's south pole, a mysterious place that has long been of interest to space agencies and scientists. The unmanned probe touched down early this morning. Eric Sorensen explains what it's looking for and what it could mean for establishing long-term settlements on the moon.
Chandrayaan-3 circled for days. Finally, a safe landing spot on the harsh terrain of the moon's south pole. For India, a nation outside the great powers in space, a breakthrough.
This success belongs to all of humanity.
India will be the first to explore close up a region that every space nation wants to know more about, the South Pole, where water in ice opens new possibilities for humans to live and develop resources on other planets.
The data shows us that there is water ice there. If we want to have humans on the surface of the moon, if we want to be able to use those resources to go further, to use the moon as a stepping stone to get to Mars.
There have been more than 140 missions from the Earth to the moon. Some have orbited, some have crashed into it, others have landed safely. The most famous, the 6 Apollo missions, when 12 humans actually walked on the moon. Half a century ago, the U.S. and the Soviet Union were the first to achieve soft landings on the lunar surface. More recently, on the far side of the moon, China put a lander and a rover on the lunar surface in 2019. And now, India, the 4th country with a soft landing at the South Pole. A rover and lander that can operate for 2 weeks.
India's efforts to get their equipment on the ground, to be able to be something of a flagship, if you will, to the international community.
It means the space race will be more competitive. Even after Russia's Luna 25 crashed on the moon this month, a top Russian official was blunt, saying commercial and military advantages will be exploited in space. As the stakes increase, so will the potential for conflict.
I obviously feel really happy for my country.
For now, India is celebrating its success.
0.
With smaller, cheaper rockets, India is promising scientific cooperation with other countries. It's also becoming a new international power in space. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Still ahead, Donald Trump prepares to surrender to authorities in Georgia. In the U.S., former President Donald Trump is expected to turn himself in to authorities in Georgia tomorrow. In the indictment, Trump is accused of being the head of a criminal enterprise that was part of a broad conspiracy to overturn his 2020 electoral defeat in that state. And Trump's former lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, surrendered today. Jackson Prosco explains what it all means.
Past the guardhouse and behind razor wire, Donald Trump will once again make history as he surrenders for arrest at Atlanta's notorious Fulton County Jail.
Sheriff Labatt has indicated that he is looking to treat all the defendants the same as everybody else.
The former president's time inside will be brief. He will be fingerprinted, photographed, and assigned an inmate number, then released on $200,000 bond with strict conditions. He can't discuss the case with witnesses or co-defendants. He can't make threats against them either.
You do not have to incriminate yourself. And I think that this is a great time when Mr. Trump should more than likely exercise that silence.
This is a racketeering case involving some of the biggest names in Trump's orbit. Alleged co-conspirators include former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and former Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani, who surrendered Wednesday.
This is an assault on our Constitution. Fannie Willis will go down in American history as having conducted one of the worst attacks on the American Constitution ever when this case is dismissed.
Prosecutors are hoping some of the defendants will plead out and flip before trial, while Trump's team is trying to delay, hoping to move the case from state to federal court.
I think that this thing is going to go on possibly for years. There's going to be so many appeals from both sides.
USA! Smack in the middle of it all is another presidential campaign. One where a man facing multiple state and federal indictments is still the leading Republican candidate. Trump is carefully choreographing his surrender for maximum media exposure. He's turning himself in the day after the first Republican candidates debate, which he's skipping, all but guaranteeing that Republican voters spend the next 48 hours talking about nothing but the arrest of the party's most popular candidate. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Atlanta.
Tonight's Your Canada is this squirrel munching on a pine cone in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.